Chapter 1 of the Adopting of Rosa Marie by Carol Watson Rankin. Borrowed Babies. The oldest inhabitant said that Lakeville was experiencing an unusual fall. He would probably have said the same thing if the high-perched town had accidentally tumbled off the bluff into the blue lake. But in this instance he referred merely to the weather, which was certainly unusually mild for autumn. It was not, however, the oldest, but four of the youngest citizens that rejoiced most in this unusual prolonging of summer, for the continued warm weather made it possible for those devoted friends, Jean Mapes, Marjorie Vale, Mabel Bennett, and little Betty Tucker, to spend many a delightful hour in their precious dandelion cottage, the real tumble-down house that was now, after so many narrow escapes, safely their very own. Some day, to be sure, it would be torn down to make room for a habitable dwelling, but that unhappy day was still too remote to cause any uneasiness. Of course, when very cold weather should come, it would be necessary to close the beloved cottage, for there was no heating plant, there were many large cracks over and under the doors and around the windows, and by lying very flat on the dining-room table and peering under the baseboards, one could easily see what was happening in the next yard. These and other defects would surely make the little house uninhabitable in winter. But while the unexpectedly extended summer lasted, the cottagers were rejoicing over every pleasant moment of weather, and praying hard for other pleasant moments. Of all the games played in Dandelion Cottage, the one called "Mother" was the most popular. To play it, it was necessary, first of all, to divide the house into 4 equal parts. As there were 5 rooms, this division might seem to offer no light task. But by first subtracting the kitchen, it was possible to solve this difficult mathematical problem to the cottagers' entire satisfaction. But of course one can't play "Mother" without possessing a family. The cottagers solved this problem also. Betty's home could always be counted on to furnish at least 2 decidedly genuine babies, and Jean could always borrow a perfectly delightful little cousin named Anne Halliday. But Marjorie and Mabel, to their sorrow, were absolutely destitute of infantile relatives. Mabel was the chief sufferer. Sedate Marjorie, plausible of tongue, convincing in manner, could easily accumulate a most attractive family at a very short notice by the simple expedient of borrowing babies from the next block. But nowhere within reasonable reach was there a mother willing to entrust her precious offspring a second time to heedless Mabel. "Now, Mabel," Mrs. Mercer would say, when Mabel pleaded to have young Percival for her very own for just one brief hour, "I'd really like to oblige you, but it's getting late in the season. You are not careful enough about doors and windows, and the last time you borrowed Percival, you brought him home with a stiff neck that lasted 3 days." "But I did remember to return him," pleaded Mabel. "Do you sometimes forget?" queried Mrs. Mercer with interest. "I did twice," confessed always honest Mabel, "but truly I don't see how I can help it when the babies sleep and sleep and sleep the way those 2 did. You see, I made a bed for Gerald Price on the lowest down closet shelf, and he was so perfectly comfortable that he thought he was asleep for all night." "What about the other time?" "That was Molly Dixon. But then I had 5 children that day and only 1 bed. Molly slipped down in the crack at the back. She's awfully thin, and I never missed her until her mother came after her. That was rather a bad time." Mabel sighed at the recollection, for Mrs. Dixon found the cottage locked up for the night and poor little Molly crying under the bed. "Mabel, and you went to borrow my precious Percival?" "But it couldn't happen again," protested Mabel earnestly. "Betty says that I'm just like lightning. I never strike twice in the same place. That's the reason I get into so many different kinds of scrapes. I'll be ever so careful, though, if you'll let me borrow Percival just this one time." Mrs. Mercer, however, refused to part with Percival. Other mothers, approached by pleading Mabel, refused likewise to entrust their babies to her enthusiastic but heedless keeping. They knew her too well. "The thing for you to do," suggested Marjorie, ostentatiously washing the perfectly clean faces of the 4 delightful small persons that she had been able, without any trouble at all, to borrow in Blaker Street, "is to find a mother that really wants to get rid of her children." "Yes," said Bob Tucker, who had dropped in to deliver a basket of apples that Mrs. Crane had sent to her former neighbors. "You ought to advertise for the kind of mother that feeds her babies to crocodiles. Perhaps some of them have emigrated to this country and sort of missed the Ganges River." "You might try the orphan asylum," offered Jean as a balm for this wound. "It's only 4 blocks from here." "I have," declared Mabel dejectedly. "I went there early this morning." "What happened?" demanded Betty, who had just arrived with the little Tucker under each arm. "They said they'd let them go permanently to responsible parties. I didn't know just exactly what that meant, so I said, 'Does that mean you'll lend me a few for 2 hours?' And would they? Well, they didn't. They said I'd better borrow a teddy bear." "How mean," said sympathetic Betty. "Never mind, I'll lend you Peter this time." "Say," queried Mabel, after she had accepted Betty's proffered brother, "what does permanently mean?" "For keeps," explained Jean. "What are responsible parties?" "Jean and Betty and I," twinkled Marjory, "but not you." "That's good," laughed Bob, who, like Marjory, loved to tease. "But never mind, Mabel. After you've practiced a year or two on Peter, who's a nuisance if there ever was one, you'll find yourself growing Whoop! What was that?" That was a sudden crash that resounded through the house. Everybody rushed to the kitchen. The big dishpan that Mabel had left on the edge of the kitchen table was upside down on the floor. At least half of little Peter Tucker was under it. But the half that remained outside was so unmistakably alive that nobody felt very seriously alarmed, except Peter. "Thank goodness," said Mabel, removing the pan. "This is just a little Tucker, not any Percival Mercer. Cheer up, Peter. You're not as wet as you think you are. There wasn't more than a quart of water in that pan, and it was almost perfectly clean." And Peter, soothed by Mabel's reassuring tone, immediately cheered up. End of chapter 1.